Thanks, Chris. Welcome to the podcast, it's good to have you here today.
Excellent to be here.
Yeah, no worries, mate. Now, you have a long... You're a bit like me. Your family's been around ag a long while. Now, I think I read somewhere on the internet you're a fifth generation farming? Fifth generation. So that means your families came here pretty early on the piece, because WA's not been around that long as a farming entity. So can you just tell us, I actually want to understand the journey from farm boy to CEO Rural West. So I know there's a lot of stuff in there, but can you give us a brief run through?
We'll try and leave out some of the stuff.
Leave out all the stuff that you don't want in there. This is a chance to just tell us all the good highlight reel.
Oh, the highlight. Okay, so I was born fifth generation farmer in South Australia. I didn't really realise what that meant at the time. It's only when I moved to West Australia when I was 22. But as I grew up, anywhere I went on the peninsula, people would know me. Everyone's fathers or their grandfathers would be asking, "Oh, Roy Wheatcroft." Yeah, okay, we know Roy. So I was always located. When I got to West Australia, it was fascinating because no one knew me and no one cared. And I never knew that was a thing that I had growing up. So it's fascinating.
Did you find that a freedom? It's like when you travel when you're young. I found like when I first travelled by myself in Europe when I was 18, there's just this beautiful freedom of not having any expectation on you. You're just this random dude in this place.
Yeah, no, that's a correct thought. I found more freedom when I moved to the city, actually, because you think there's so many people, but actually no one cares in the city at all. Whereas in the country, people know what's going on in their town and with their neighbours, and just the community.
Yeah, I always found that, I always say that to people about, because there's a lot of shows on telly about living in country towns, like that.
Yeah.
And I say, so it's different. So when you're in a country town, and I always say, I could always tell people in the early days who had grown up in a country town, because they were incredibly, not tolerance, probably a bit of a strong word, but they tend to get on with a lot of different people really easily. And I said, because when you live in a country town, you got your crowd, and you don't get to choose your crowd. It's just there.
Absolutely.
And everybody's different, just like they are in the city. But you just learn to get on in most cases, don't you? So, but in the city, you get to choose your crowd, so you can pretty much avoid anyone you don't like.
Exactly. They don't even like their neighbours quite often, it seems. But no, this young bride was saying to me that her mother-in-law had said to her when she moved to the country that you actually, in the country, you may not even like your friends, but these are the people that are your friends.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting insight. It's a play with words, but it's actually true, isn't it? That in the country, people, you don't decide, do I really like this person? It's like these are the people you live with, and you make friends of them.
But it is
community.
Yeah, but there's also my father very early on. My dad's he's not as talkative as me. He's quite a gentle guy, and he always just said, listen to everyone, because everybody has their story. And he goes, it doesn't matter whether they're shearing your sheep or they're lending you money or they're driving your truck or whatever. Listen to everyone, because everyone has their story. And in a country town, that's so true, isn't it? Everybody's different. Everybody has their story. And I think in country towns, in order to get on, we have to learn to get in touch with those stories, don't we?
I think so. Yes.
Anyway, continue. I've interrupted you. So you're South Australian boy. You moved to WA.
Farmed till I was 28. So for 6 years, and broadacre farming. Never knew anything else really. And then it just didn't work out, partly with the family and partly I just wanted something different. So I moved to the city and started to work with teenagers with emotional behavioural difficulties via a year in Cundon at their youth centre. And that was fascinating because it's a totally different world, and I hadn't realised that you hear of institutionalised kids, but not so much institutionalised staff. But I work with people who had totally lost that ability to understand why they were going to work. And they'd lost that dream they had when they set out to work with kids. And they didn't choose to lose it, in a sense. It just happened to them, but they live within it. And they're making choices that keep them constrained. And I found that a fascinating insight into the psychology of it.
And so you're sort of coming into the newbie.
Yeah,
and you come. I've deliberately chosen this because I think I can have an impact. I'll let you tell your story, but
Yeah.
but they at some point you're saying may have had the same drive.
I think they would have. No one chooses a job. You know, basically, you don't go into a helping industry unless you want to help. Do you?
No.
I think genuinely they did at the start. I never knew them back then, of course. But I could see how that institution destroyed, what I would say is destroyed people. They may not agree they're destroyed. But, you know, to lose that ability to be happy and laugh about what's going on is a significant loss.
And probably a lot less valuable to their clients ultimately too, which are these...
I think they become harmful.
Yeah,
I'm much harsher. I have got a right-wing bent really in terms of, you know, I like markets and I like the energy that says you either perform or you should change.
Yeah.
But in that system, people can go on for quite a while and not perform. I mean, your whole job is there to benefit those kids, really. And they're teenagers, but yeah.
I always say that to my sons and friends about politics. I said, by and large, and maybe this is not so much true anymore with maybe the concept of a career politician, and I'm not that close to many to understand. But I would have thought if I had a bee in my bonnet, like to enter politics, you've kind of like you've got to be in your bonnet, haven't you?
Absolutely.
You want to have. You're actually putting your hand up, which I think is incredibly brave, right?
Yep.
Because it's tough, and say I want to somehow influence change in this town, this country, this state.
Yep.
But when you get in there, somehow that gets a lot harder. You know, and at the same time, sometimes we see a politician who's technically effective, but have lost that drive that got them there in the first place, or it's hidden under a layer of compromise somewhere. You know, so
yeah, I think the great thing about politics is that they are about compromise. Not always compromise. They're about sorting out the fact people have different views. And you have to come to a decision. And that's actually their role, isn't it? So while in one sense I think, we can knock politicians because they're always trying to keep some group happy, in actual fact, that's what we want from them. We don't want a dictator. We want these people to go in and actually try and make it so everybody has some wins. And I think in a democracy, it works really well where some of the population gets some wins some of the time.
Isn't it? So and in the case of a democracy and a market economy, you know, really there's a couple of concepts, isn't it? As a whole, we're trying to grow the pie, right?
Yes.
And then we're trying to share the pie evenly, just like a family, really, isn't it? So we as a group want to share this pie so we all benefit and grow the pie together. And really, that's the role of politics, isn't it? And
yes,
you know,
and to enable it to happen.
Yeah.
Because while we want to share the pie evenly, we don't really, because we actually want to reward some of the people that are doing. It's a very powerful thing for people that do things more efficiently and effectively, for them to have more say in how it's done. Because we all benefit from them benefiting. Yeah. And it's that balance, isn't it?
And that's what makes politics both hard and controversial.
And like you said, I have a lot of respect for politicians. No easy thing to put your hand up. That a level of sort of abuse that's levelled at people that try to do something, regardless of whether they're right or wrong, they get a heap of
I'll tell you
harassment.
And you don't even have to agree with their politics. I think I remember I had a lot of respect for Peter Garrett, actually, who was essentially, yes, he was a rock singer, but he was an activist, right, at heart. And he stuck his hand up and went into politics.
Yeah.
And I remember him talking once, he went into Labour politics rather than Green politics, even though essentially he was a Greens person, because he thought he could actually institute and have more change, influence more change within the Labour Party. And he found it brutally hard, obviously, and got into a bit of strife. But I just have huge respect for that, because he didn't just harp from the outside. He goes, all right, I'm going to give it a crack, see if I can actually do something here. And not many of us want to actually wade into those muddy waters and have a go, do we?
Yeah, and I think we get it a little bit wrong. We tend to think ministers, from the outside, we definitely think ministers make decisions and control things. When you're close to those ministers, they are often struggling with their departments to get them to do what they're asking. And the departments are sometimes struggling to deliver what's being asked. It's actually quite a complex thing.
I think it's just an amazing... I've got a good friend who's a Director General, and when I listen to it, it's such a complex beast.
Yes.
And sometimes that complexity saves us from people who just, I mean, companies are beautifully simple, right? Because you have a CEO like myself or yourself, and you can go, okay, we want this to happen.
Yep.
It might have been the stupidest idea ever, but it still happens.
Yes.
That's right. In politics, those get ironed out with this messy complexity. So yes, it can stop some good things happening, but it stops all the bad stuff getting through as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, you are now in WA. You're working with these kids,
Yep.
And
so for a period of time, I had energy. I think some of these jobs also take something from you. So you run out of energy for it, you run out of motivation. And the department when I joined it was changing how they were doing things. A very simple, I've got to be careful because we signed something to say we never disclose what was being said. But they went from having an institution where you could lock kids in to one that said there should be an open hostels. And then there was this move to actually have doors that could be locked to keep kids in the room so they didn't misbehave at night or whatever. Now, part of that's correct. But a part of it is shifting back away from what is a philosophical approach to working with the kids, where you need to get on side with them and enable them to actually make the decisions that they need to, that are beneficial to themselves. Yeah? So, and once you lose faith in it, I think you should move on. Because I don't like being destructive in something. I think.
So I want to actually ask, I really want to move on to the rural stuff, but I want to ask, going from a farm, so you're a farm boy, right?
Yeah.
And we've just been talking about politicians and conviction and stuff. What's made you go, that's the job for me? I want to do this. What's in you made you want to pick that?
Well, a part of it I didn't, because it was just a job I could get at the time after I had a bit of a blue with my dad. So that part was true. But then I was picked up by some people within the department. I wasn't in the department when I first moved to work with teenagers. And then they said, we really want you to come and apply for some jobs and work with us, because they thought I had something to offer. And at that point, I sort of agreed with that, that could be true. And probably with those couple of people, it was true, they ran things really well. But the overall system is quite difficult, as we've discussed with politicians, politics. Yeah.
So essentially this, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but your career into counselling ultimately, it's almost
enabling. It was enabling people to see something different. So what I realised was people often make these choices that they don't actually want to choose.
Yeah.
So you have families, you have parents with kids that they almost can't stand, right? But when you sit with them, and while I was based in hostels for a year or two, I actually spent most of my time on community-based teams returning kids back to their family or enabling them to live somewhere else. But with a relationship with their parents. They all needed a level of relationship, and they're okay. Even if it was once a month almost, for an hour, it was still better than nothing, and it was as much as could be sustained. But anyway, I realised these parents were choosing a way of behaving that gave them these kids that misbehaved, and there was no good relationship. But it's not that they chose to not have a relationship with their kids. Right? They were trapped by their story, what I actually would now describe as a dominant story. So if I said to you, tell me what you did yesterday, you might take 5 minutes, you might take 10, right, if something good happened. But that's all you take. And if I asked about last week, you'd take about the same amount of time. Now, actually to retell what happened yesterday would take 12 hours. But we don't do it. Our brain just automatically picks up on the key points and it gives you a summary. Right?
And do we filter that through how we think the day? We have this filter in our world that goes, and we put everything through that filter.
Yes, it happens before we become conscious. So the filter has already happened by the time we're thinking about it.
So it's almost like I think for there I am.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, they had good insights. So that notion that people are trapped by the way they're thinking, and if they can actually identify that, they'll often choose something different that they want, is really powerful. That attracts me. That is something that I just feel energized by.
It's really interesting. I remember when I first read Daniel Kahneman and Amos.
Yes, brilliant book.
Thinking Fast and Slow.
We should have written that. We could have got a Nobel Prize.
I know. I mean, do you know what blew me away about that book? Is that these guys were behavioural psychologists and they won the Nobel Prize for economics.
Yes, I know.
For proving that humans were not a rational actor.
I know.
Right?
Yes, brilliant.
And I think I was in the podcast on the way to work today, and Daniel Cardinal was being interviewed on this particular podcast by Shane Parrish, and he was talking about heuristics, and he was talking about like biases, and this is what you're talking about. And he goes, and he said, so essentially, it's biologically imperative for us to conserve as much energy as possible, right? And the brain is the biggest consumer of calories in the body.
Yep.
So the prefrontal cortex that humans have is essentially an incredible energy saving device. So if we don't deliberately choose to think, we won't, right? And I think they called it System 1 and System 2 in thinking fast and slow. I can't remember.
Yep.
And this is sort of what you're talking about. And I go, so we very quickly default to our biases, our predisposition. This is the way the world works.
That's where the biases come from, because our brain is, as you said, saving energy because it can't do it all. And fascinating in that, the brain actually determines most of our decisions, including what we say, etc., is done on prediction. So, you know, with a good thing for Aussies is sport.
Yeah.
So a ball comes at you really quickly, right? The guy reaches out, grabs it, catches it. Mm-hmm. He thinks he saw the ball coming and caught it. Mm-hmm. It's not true. That happened before he perceived it, and his brain was trained. It knew that it was going to catch the ball, or not, which is why some people can't catch it. But it didn't actually happen that he saw the ball coming and caught it, or she saw the ball coming and reaches out and takes hold of it. Mm. The brain has already predicted where it's going to be and activated that part of your arm that is actually going to send your hand to that place to catch it,
which
before you become aware of it.
It's also, I remember back in my 20s, I used to play polo cross, and I used to think it's amazing that you could catch a ball behind your back.
This is
right?
Yes.
And I always used to say to myself, don't think about it.
Yes. Yeah,
right? Because, you know, if someone came down the field and just threw this ball at you, and you must have seen it come out of your peripheral vision somewhere, and you could reach behind, not your back, but really your shoulder, and just grab it.
Yep.
Right? And I always thought, God, and I just go, what's happening in my brain?
Yes.
And some people, I mean, I had mates who were just geniuses at this, and they could literally catch it behind their back. And I just find that just mind-blowing that the brain can work that stuff out.
Yep. It is. I agree. Mind-blowing is a great word for it.
Yeah. So, all right. So how did the journey come to where you are now? You're the CEO of Rural West, like your head of counselling. So how did you get from counselling youth through to now? I mean, I know you've done a ton of education and a lot of other stuff.
So the education happened along the way, and I just did it. I worked with someone who once said to me, "Time not spent studying is wasted," and he meant his spare time, and evenings and such. And that suited my world, so I studied for a long time. But I'd had enough of working with teenagers. I'd had enough of it, so I thought I need to change. I think I went to work for BGC, I think, for a year or two. But I just changed what I was doing. And then that's right, I went to study psychology. I had enough. I put together enough money, I could actually take some time off work and go and study full time. So I decided to do that. It will also work well for my career if I stayed with the department. So I hadn't left at that time. But I think it's okay to say my wife at that time had a significant event where she was deeply threatened at work. She worked with, shifted from working with children to a new remand hostel that the government said, this is a great place, if kids haven't been found guilty yet, they should not be locked up, so they put them in a remand hostel, and the notion was you'll have complete control, and if they misbehave, you'll simply almost push the button and people will come and take them off and lock them up. So there was a group of women that were excellent at working with children in a McCall Centre. And this is one of the things that brings together our story. So the minister visited McCall, and they work with mums with children where very early on had been picked up there were behavioural issues. Right? So this is often the community nurse knew the mum was struggling or such. And so the parents would get referred to this McCall Centre. McCall would take, if the child was a little bit old, they'd take the child in, they'd get the behaviour under control, and then bring the parents in and teach them how to do it. How to control these children. And often some of them were on Ritalin, they took off all the medications and used behavioural true behavioural modification techniques in the sense of just good, rewarding what you want, don't give attention to what you don't want. And the kids would come good. Brilliant program.
Wow.
Minister wanted more of it, so the bureaucrats combined it with community support hostels where I worked, which was not quite so successful, and then they shut down those early intervention programs. I do not know the history. I may get shot if this gets out, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
So that's part of my confrontation with working for this a bureaucracy that does that.
But I think, without, again, going back to that point of criticising, right? So these, at the time, you're on the cold face here, and your wife at the time was on the cold face, and that really affects you. And you go, why did they make that decision?
Yeah.
But there might have been, like you said,
absolutely.
At the time, to those people in whatever role, it was a no-brainer. Like it was like
it probably was.
Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Good comment. Yeah.
And
that's kept me out of jail. Thank you for that.
and I always think the trouble is we sit there outside these decisions with no context.
Yeah. That's
because
true.
it affects us. It does hurt us. We as just residents or whatever. These things deeply affect us, and we just sit there and go, "What muppet made that decision?"
Yes.
But that poor muppet probably had 1,000 other things they had to compromise on.
What a generous statement. How good are you? Good on you.
I don't always say that.
I expect the invoice for therapy at the end of the session. So that's good. So she had this. She couldn't stand it. So she was deeply affected. Had to leave work. Was paid out. And so it's like, well, I'll just go and study for a while and choose something different. So we had a surf shop. No, she wanted to surf, and it worked quite well. Helped set that up. Ended up running it a lot and so I had never had anything to do with clothing stores, right?
Yeah.
And I got to really enjoy it. It was a great thing. And compared to farming, it's a year. Some decisions you can enact within a few months, sale of sheep and such. But basically, it's a yearly cycle. Surf shop, don't like it. Next week, it's gone. Like you can just change it immediately. Get your money. It's a beautiful system for teaching you about management and how you need to be on top of it, which is your passion, of course.
Yeah, and definitely. I remember I learned that lesson really badly. I was looking to help a small business advisor with cash flow forecasting because I was saying about AgriMaster and there's not much in that space. And he goes, I love what you guys do, but a year's too long. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, pretty much for me and all my clients, 90 days is a year.
Yes.
Right? And he goes, you guys, help with your clients managing these cash flow forecasts, etc., over a 12-month and sometimes 24-month, 5-year period. But he goes, so I actually run my clients in 13-week cycles, right? And sometimes I break them down into 1 and 2 week cycles. Yep. And he goes, that's how quick it changes.
Yes.
And I was going, wow. And he goes, so you just got to get, and so like you said, especially retail, it's just so fast, isn't it?
And Billabong were brilliant. People who had it, which was sport tech at that time, they were brilliant at coaching you if you would listen. I remember one time he said to me, Chris, don't see t-shirts, just see them as like $30 notes hanging there, and you need to get them back. And if they're not selling, you need to get it back and put something else in that will sell. Because you need to, it's a $20 note, you need to make it into 30. And it's a really good notion, because if something's not selling, it's not going to sell easier in 3 months' time when it's season's changing. If it's not selling, get rid of it.
And it's opinion, isn't it? So especially in clothing, it's not what you like, it's what people buy.
No, exactly.
And I suppose in farming, we don't really get that sort of, it's a much cruder engine, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
yes.
Right?
Yep.
So it's more like, yes, you get food that people buy, but most times as an agriculture, you're so far disconnected from that decision.
Yes.
Right? But in retail, it's kind of, no, we don't like that colour.
That's right. It's the immediate variable. It's like you don't have to wait for it to not rain. You've already got it. It's already not raining. It's immediate. It's fascinating.
I remember talking to a lady actually at one of the mums at school, and she was in fashion, and they sold these, those ladies' dress shops that sell $1,000 dresses.
Oh, yes.
So 400% markup. And I go, so what's with the 400% markup? And she goes, we only sell about 20% of that at that price.
Yes.
Right? She goes, when you get to that pointy end of fashion, it either works or it just doesn't,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So she goes, we bank on selling 10 or 20% of that product out of that 400%, and the rest we have to sell below cost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I was going, wow, it's a brutal machine, isn't it?
That part is, yeah. And that's why if you're good at it, if you've got that talent in that purchasing, you'll do really well.
Yeah.
But you have to do all of it well, but you need that component. Yeah.
Anyway, back to counselling, mate. So you ended up at Rural West eventually. So
Yes.
how did you get into rural counselling? And
So I became a single dad, needed a job, and that was the one that signed off on it at that moment. And I thought, I can do that. It gave me flexibility that I needed.
So
with the daughters.
let's get into rural counselling. So you got into rural counselling, and you told me a story about your first client, mate, and really how that set you up. Well, not set you up, but influenced you for what would become a long career in this, right? So tell me about that first client and how it how that experience influenced you.
Okay, so just so people know, we deal with people. Some of them have $1 billion of debt combined. Our clients, and this one didn't. So I just want to mention that at the start.
Yeah, definitely.
But so I'm there just to listen, to see how the job's done.
Yep.
So I hop in the passenger side of the car, and we head out an hour or two from the town, and we're down the Bitumen Road, down the dirt road, and eventually we hit a few potholes, and then as you look out, the fences are starting to sag, and we slow down and we pull into the driveway. And I still had this visual image of the driveway because I noticed there was the wreck of a car, the bones of a car left. And then I realised the trees, just dead trees along the way, and they were fairly stark. And then there were bones of animals. And we wandered down through the potholes to the track to the farmhouse. And it was one of those images where it had been early built, I think they called them war service homes, that's the small timber ones. And it was painted, but only halfway along. It had sort of run out of energy to paint it. And at the front of it, you could see the veranda had actually decayed. So it had this strange image. And when we went into it, I was sitting there not saying anything because it was my job to listen. And I realised that this was a very difficult situation. And on the wall was this picture of a stork swallowing a frog, and the frog had its hands out around the neck of the stork trying to choke it, and it had never give up underneath it. And as I'm looking at that, I hear this really distraught voice of the client as he's saying, I need somewhere for my sheep, I have to, how am I going to live if I can't find somewhere for my sheep? And I realised that this was a very difficult situation. So when we'd left and dust spilling out the back of the car as we head down the road, I said to my colleague, what's happened here? How has this come about? And he said, 5 years ago there was a group of his friends came here and they stopped the auction by the bank of the property, and they put that poster on the wall saying, we'll stand with you, don't worry, we'll keep those bastards away. And that 5 years ago, and it had just progressed. And I realised then, it really confronted me that there was this challenge of working with people that you could do harm. In my head, I think that's harmful. This person's life was going past. The longer they spent in that locked-in situation where they saw the world that they just needed to battle on, they were going backwards. There's no good outcome from that. And I realised the challenge was to come up with a model to not be part of that. Yeah, you have a choice. You can either just do the job and take the money, or you needed to come up with a way of not allowing that to happen.
So I want to explore this model that we want to talk about. Before that, let's talk about Rural West, right? So to give this a bit of context, you took a role, I don't know what the organisation was called at the time.
It was actually called Southern Aid Camp. It was done throughout the state. Different centres had set up their own. Really, local governments would support them. The community came up with half the money. The feds put half the money in. States 10%, and you could set up a service to help. So the program was because they said we don't want to subsidise farmers at all anymore. We're going to take away the subsidies for these have superphosphate subsidies and such. Yeah. And they said farmers need to be able to adjust, and your service is to help those that aren't doing too well at adjusting to either adjust or to leave. So that was the notion behind it. Yeah. And so the community that were concerned about what was happening could set up a financial counselling service.
And is that rural West now, which is a much bigger entity, etc.? Is it the bones of it very much the same, or the core of it the same, or has it changed over time?
It's quite different because some years on from that, say 7 years after that, they decided to make them state. The federal minister wanted statewide services, and that's what he announced. So in WA, they decided to form a statewide service. Not all the states did that. South Australia did, but the Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland had multiple services. And then somewhere they decided to change their mind and they allowed multiple services, but we'd already decided on one in WA. I actually, so my comment on, so in amongst me getting involved with coming up with a model of how to deal with that, it just seemed to me to use Harvard. Harvard were the people who were great at business, and I would bring the counselling skills into enable people to understand it. So Harvard says you look at people's values, you look at what you're trying to achieve, and then you do the maths. Is the business able to do what you're trying to do?
So that's a good point. So this model, let's talk about this model, right?
Yep.
So you've come away from that going, okay, this needs to be done a different way, right?
Yeah.
So you approached Harvard. So and this different way was this. You were talking about this. Don't start at the like this case. It was the bank end. They were just fighting the bank, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's two components to it, isn't it? One is people can't come to terms with their circumstances. So in the same way as those parents weren't able to adjust what they were doing to have a good relationship with their teenagers, which they actually did want. And if you could enable that change, they would choose that to do it, to have a good relationship. In the same way, people don't choose to go broke. It might appear that they do, but they're actually not. Something else is happening in their head or before they're conscious. So you need to have a model that's very clear about what should happen in the sense, well, you need a framework by which people can make decisions. So you need to calm and clarify for them what is happening. They need to be able to see it in an externalised way. So what we would say is you talk about it being on the table, not internal to them. So often if you talk to someone who's locked in, you've got a friend who's not doing too well with something, it's often about them. They'll talk about what's happening, how they're feeling, what's going on. Whereas if you can actually put it out onto the table and they can refer to it, like you can talk about the relationship issues by saying it's a risk to the business. Harvard has somewhere to put everything that happens, right? It's also an opportunity. And I saw a number of couples, financial difficulty puts a lot of pressure on relationships. And sometimes I would just reflect to them that I could pick up that there was a lot of fair bit of tension, but I would say, I'd give the context. Finances always put tension, often puts tension on relationships. I feel as if that might be happening. I'd often look at the guy and go, Harvard would say this is a risk, and I assure you it is if it all goes pear-shaped. But what do you want to do about it? You can put it down as a risk, we just label it and deal with it later. You can put it across here as an opportunity to do something. You can go to counselling, whatever you come up with, but it's an issue we should put somewhere.
Yeah.
And that very act of talking to them about putting a name to the tension and then saying, what do you want to do with it? Enable them mostly to say, let's put it, they would go away and think about it quite often. And my next visit they say, no, we're going to park that. We're going to deal with that when we come back to it. You know, when we've got the other stuff sorted. It's very powerful. And so you can do that with a lot of the issues. It just allows people to focus in on what is critically important, which is the sort of thing you often talk about business. You know, what's actually happening with the numbers, and are we in front of what's going on and what could go on?
Yeah, it's about the brutal truth. We talked about it before on the phone. Yeah. It's about that brutal truth. But what we do here is very numbers focused. But what I like about what you were talking before is, so when I think rural West, I'm thinking someone's going to come in and they're going to look at my accounts, help me build a cash flow. It's a bit like, you look on, what's that lady who made it, she did so well during the whole COVID, My Budget, or...
Oh, yes, yeah.
She used to go and help people who got too many Harvey Norman, 45 month stereo systems or whatever, right? She's going to help people with their financial problem. But it's more, what you're saying here is the money sort of comes at the end. You start way before cash flows and P&Ls and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Because we have heaps of consultants that can give advice. Often with our clients, something is happening that the advice is no longer able to be implemented, or it's not relevant. Advice is no longer useful sometimes, which is fascinating, because we often, when we want to respond to an industry in difficulty, we think we'll give them advice, we'll give them consultants, we'll pay money. And the evidence is it doesn't do very well. And no one knows, people puzzle over why. But it's actually because at that point, the people who already are responding to clear advice, because of the way their brain is processing it, they've already taken it, right? But something is preventing us. It's very interesting that we can be trapped. So when we talk about the dominant story, the way in which we tell what happened to us yesterday, a part of that traps us, because that becomes how we tell ourselves the story of where we are and what's going on. So the way in which you can enable alternative stories is you actually talk to the person about alternatives to that. So you wouldn't say it in those blunt terms, but there will often be indications that people have done something that is successful. So even normally, people always contain the answer, actually. You just need to explore it with them in a way that enables them to do that.
I'll tell you a good example is I read an amazing book around education. One of the things was about, and one of them talks about IQ and smartness, right?
Yeah.
With this concept of IQ. And one of the studies was they got children, right, and put them into two different groups in a classroom. And they said, you're in the smart group and you're in the challenge group, right? If you're in the smart group, and this wasn't picked, what do you call it, based on, you might have studied this, it's just random. And the kids who were told they were smarter performed better academically. And the kids who were told that they weren't smart, regardless, performed worse. So how powerful these stories are. So if you say you're a battler, you will probably remain a battler. If you say you're not clever, you probably will. Isn't it amazing how we almost convince ourselves to be something with these stories?
And parallel to that, without telling the kids, they told the teachers the same thing. And the teacher, and the impact of that on they say to them, these couple of kids have come up in the test as being exceptionally smart, it's going to happen over time. Those kids would all improve because the teacher expectation created it.
And we treat people differently, don't we?
Without realising it, yes.
Yeah, and like you said, that image of that farmer, that first client, as soon as you see someone, the clothes they wear, the house they live in, the farm, what it looks like, you immediately treat them differently.
Yeah.
Don't you?
So,
so for your role, that's so hard.
Yeah, it's one of the key things with all the crew that become counsellors with us, is rural financial counsellors, is that you have to enable people to see that those biases may be incorrect.
Yeah. I remember I had this experience at the coaching up race day once. I stood next to this guy at the bar, and he looked like Angry Anderson, like head to toe tattoos, like the face tat, the bald head, the whole. And I was going, poor. And I was actually intimidated by this, right? He looked intimidating. And then he opened his mouth, and he had this high-pitched voice, and he was really nice, right? Gentle, really gentle, right? And I was going, wow, like the paradigm just blew me away. And talking about reading a book by its cover.
Yes. Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? The brain does not want to accept it.
And I struggled to accept it.
Yes, great insight. That I had the chance to do I did behavioural economics with Harvard. Yeah. And it is fascinating, the work. And I agree with you that it's fascinating. It comes out of behaviour. It comes out of economists, not the psychologists.
Yes.
And that's because, I suspect it's because all of our professions develop this almost cocoon around them, and that's the knowledge.
And maybe this isn't ag, so you see this in actual behaviour. So one of the things I want to really explore with you is, so I've always been fascinated with this idea that you can get, especially in the early days, there was these two farmers who started with a selection or a soldier settlement block.
Yes.
And in 2023, one owns 25,000 hectares, and the other one is bankrupt.
Yep.
Right? And they had the same land, the same opportunity. You know, there's probably a whole lot of nuances in there that we don't know about. But this story is across Australia.
Yep.
Right? It's across the world, really.
Yes.
And what's the difference between... And it's not about wheat and sheep and cattle and everything. It's something else, isn't it?
Yeah. It's fascinating. I think there's a great thing within business studies that would say to you there is no right... Often there is no right decision. There is just a decision that you need to make, and then you need to keep correcting it. Yeah? And there were these two mates. One of them was talking to me. He was the successful one, but he said, you know, my mate made the same decision I did, the same decision to expand by about the same amount, the same debt, 2 years after I did, and he ended up broke. It is purely, in a sense, luck. So we know it's not all luck because the stats don't reflect that, right?
Yeah.
But we know that luck plays a part in that.
And I think it's also crediting your luck. I remember reading once is that the people who got into trouble are the people who don't credit their luck because they actually think they're cleverer than they're really.
Yes,
do you know what I mean?
Great
Like
concept.
if you think that you're good at this, you stop being humble about the decisions, right? You go, okay, I did really well this year.
Yep.
And so it's very easy to tell yourself you're the best business, right?
Yes.
But it's much harder to say, no, yes, I did make a lot of good decisions, but I got bloody lucky.
Yes.
So next year, I'm going to approach next year with a bit of humility.
Yes.
Right.
It's fascinating. It's completely correct. You know, well, I think it is, what you just said.
Yeah.
With these studies of CEOs, they would try and find what behavioural traits make them the better. And they realise it's not. What we actually do is attribute to the great leaders. If they've been successful, we then attribute that they were always great. It's a bias we have in observing them. And mostly, when Harvard looked at the top executives and how successful they were, the worst thing that can happen is that they get recognised as being successful. Because in virtually every case, not just one or two, in every case, they ended up performing much poorer going forward. Some of it's because they took time off to write books, to be interviewed, but other is they were never there. What you've just said is completely correct.
And I think with ag, it's this is not just ag, this is every industry. This is the danger of drinking your own Kool-Aid, right? And this is what CEOs, industry CEOs, any farm managers, anything, right? Is as soon as you start seeing yourself as infallible, you stop making objective, clear decisions because you don't think you can get it wrong, right? And Google did this, right? So this is one of the dangers I found where people would, I think it was either Daniel Carter or David Roth. He was talking about the danger of copying business leaders, right? Whether that be in ag or whether that be in anything else. Because we think, okay, I'll just do it the way Facebook did it, or do it the way Google. They didn't even do it the way they did it, right? Right? So all this is written afterwards. It's a story of success, which is actually based on a bunch of random accidents. Google tried to sell out for $1 million.
I know, how about that? How
right?
And that bloke you turned him down.
Yeah, and he got turned down, and because they didn't want to do it, and the only reason they expanded is because they needed to pay their investor back. Right? And so they wanted to get rid of the thing. So
it's an amazing story.
So there's this $1 billion accidental business. And so then you get all the academics write case studies on how to do business like Google. Google doesn't even do business like Google.
That's right.
Anyway, so...
It's a fascinating story. I like it.
Yeah, so now talk about financial success, right? So you deal with a lot of people at the other end of financial success, but we're talking about heads and stories. So one of the things I'm fascinated to explore is when we face financial difficulty, whether we're a business that's got a good balance sheet or not, how do we make good decisions in a point where, so for example, this year ag's had a pretty good run in the West at least, right? And so the season hasn't finished off very well in the eastern and northern wheat belt, right? So there's a few people going, maybe the budget's not going to work like we thought it will this year. Right? So suddenly everyone's getting a little tighter, right? So how do we think clearly in that situation? Now you've seen people at the very extreme end of that situation. So what lessons have you learned about how to think in that situation?
So I congratulate that Northern wheat belt on doing it really well. So it's what they do. And I think what they do is they recognise what's going on, they recognise the impact, and they act accordingly fairly early on. And as I understand it, that's the lesson that they would give us. And they have decision points that they, because what you know is at the day you're standing in the paddock looking at the sky and there's no rain, or you've got sheep and you've got no feed, or it's going to, well, before you've got no feed, but it's going to run short. It's very difficult to make the hard decision on that day unless you've already been through it in your head. Yeah, so that thinking things through, that pre-planning, that's what they do, and I think that makes a lot of sense. They have in their head what they're going to do. Some guys would actually, I remember them explaining one time about they go in with canola early, but if it doesn't succeed in picking up, they actually spray it out and put something else in over the top, because it still gives them a chance. And they've done the maths, it's worth, mostly it comes off.
But that's the thing, they've done their maths, so they're not just randomly going and making. It looks intuitive, and they'll probably even tell their friends this is intuitive, but it's not. Like, some of the most successful people and our clients that I've had the privilege to meet over the years just know their numbers like their DNA, don't they?
Yeah.
Like, this is not a gut decision.
No, I respect. They, I remember them saying to me, because I worked out of inland from Geraldton for a while with the farming groups up there, and they would say that. They would say that you can tell they'd be concerned about younger crew coming back or such if they weren't able to talk in the right language about cost per hectare. That there's a language they wanted to hear from their colleagues. And they would be concerned when there wasn't, and we think we need to do something for these guys to get across it.
I reckon there's a thing. I agree with you. If I meet someone and they start talking about things like, let's say in the sheep area, if you start talking about wool cut per head, I can almost predict what your business looks like.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Rather than wool cut per hectare or gross margins. It goes back to that language, isn't it? So we are what we think.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you think in return per hectare, cost per DSC, or those sort of minds, you tend to evaluate things in a very different way, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. One of the fascinating things about the research in neuroscience is how malleable our brains are. So that way that we approach it actually modifies our minds, it modifies our brains, and they actually develop slightly differently. So it's not just you have that knowledge, you've also got a way in which the brain is then linking ideas together, and decision making fits against those concepts.
Yeah, I remember there's a lot of people would have either watched or heard of a very popular series on somewhere on one of the streaming centers called Yellowstone.
Yeah.
And I think in it might have even been the very first episode, there was this incredible bit of dialogue, and Rick, I can't remember the actors anyway. The John, the dad, and he had his son in the car, and they were saving. And he was wanting his son to come to town to talk to the bank manager and open a sale and do all this business stuff. And he goes, "Dad, I'm too busy. I'm here working the farm."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Why don't I have control yet?" So his son was in his mid-30s. And he goes, "The problem is, son, you can't tell the difference between working a farm and running a farm, and they're not the same thing."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or running a business in this case. And I think what you're saying, this is the same thing, isn't it? Running a farm business is not the same as working a farm, like driving tractors, drenching sheep. That's a different skill set, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
And so when you're talking about these people coming back and listening to the young people coming back, can they run the business?
Yeah, I think that's what those guys are saying. What that community guys being generic, like they're really good partnerships up there. But that's what they'd say. I think it's slightly different to if you start to get into financial difficulty. So one of the things they do in MBAs these days is they spend quite a bit of time on people understanding their own biases, because those biases are the things that, one of the fascinating things is what you're really good at can be the reason you go broke. Fascinating. But we are inclined to do more of what we're good at.
Yeah, we tend to repeat it because we can.
Yep.
It's easy.
Yeah. And under pressure, we just know absolutely for everyone who comes under pressure, the ability of their mind to think broadly diminishes. As we come under pressure, the brain just can't conceive as many things as it used to. It may be chasing all over the place, but it can't just calm and hold and consider things as it used to, as it would normally when you're relaxed. So under pressure, your brain is working less well, can see less options, and if you as soon as you become aware that you're under pressure, it does pay to go and have a yarn to someone, because. So when you're under pressure, suddenly your capacity to find solutions shrinks because what you're saying is you default to what's easy while under the pressure. Well, yeah, and sometimes maybe what's hard, but your brain just picks out what has worked previously, and if that's just go out and sow another crop, that's what it will want you to do. If it was to just ignore your partner telling you can't pay your bills, and just to just go and just ignore that and make decisions to spend money because you think you need to, that will seem really logical to you at that moment within that stress.
So is it about control? Is it about doing something? So there's always this crazy event. It's not just limited to ag, where people start going broke, and it's almost like a plant that's just about to die. Like if you look at a tree or something that's just about to die, they just shoot up 1,000 flowers in this mad event to try and save themselves, right? People do that with spending, don't they? Like they're in financial trouble, so they go and buy something like really expensive. Is it control? So and I think this is not a judgment on the people who do that, because I think we're all messed up humans, right? So why as humans do we tend to make these crazy default decisions?
Well, I can't tell you why, but I do know psychology says that people they have a name for it, because we love naming things, and they do name that. That if you've actually been without, when you get it, you actually, you'll spend more. Or if you've been struggling for a while and you suddenly get extra money come in, you'll just go out and spend it. Which is why with the GFC, they thought if we give these people money, they'll go and spend it. It hits the economy immediately, because it does.
Yeah.
The why is much more difficult.
Yeah, but it isn't interesting. But being aware of it is hard.
What you do about it, is key. So, but
and is your role as a counsellor, and you're the crew that you work with, is that actually part of your role, to get people to understand why they are doing what they're doing? Does it go that deep? Like?
Yes, but not from account. So we imagine counselling is a psychologist taking someone down a deep dark path, or therapy and just sitting on the couch. Nothing like that. So what you do is, what we do, Harvard says how you should look at it. You should look at your values, you should look at what you're trying to achieve, what's important to you, and values being what it is you value, not some hysteric, I value honesty. Right? It's actually about what do you really value, what do you hold important, what is it you're trying to achieve, and then does the maths allow it? And it's actually the business. It's not just the finances. It's like, is the business structure? Are you able to do that within what you're doing? And it's also about, for those businesses, checking. They may have a lot of people that guide them. They may have consultants and such. It's about enabling them to use those consultants well to answer the questions. So what we do is we would calm and clarify with them what's important. And what is surprising is most people in the country, most people who farm, have never been completely honest about their situation with anyone.
We just don't talk about it, do we?
No, we don't.
I always say the difference when I moved to the city.
Yes.
Right? So when I'm in the country, you're happy to talk rubbish about your wheat yield and your sheep and all that.
Yeah, put a few extra kilo on.
Yeah, and you always had the good crop in the front paddock. Right. But when I got to Perth 23 years ago, people talk about business and margins, and because we don't have much in common from a production point of view. So money becomes the conversation.
Yep.
Right? And it just made me think, in this whole time in ag, you just don't mention
No, that's right.
The M word.
Yeah. And we don't actually like people going broke. We don't respect them. And as soon as someone is going to have to sell, everyone is about how cheap they can get the land, not Right?
Vultures, isn't it?
It is. It's a very difficult space. That's why everything is completely confidential. People don't really know. A lot of people still don't know we exist after nearly 30 years in total, because it's so confidential. But yeah, it's finding somewhere that you can actually discuss that, which is why I argue the Royal Financial Counselling, there is no other service like it. There is nothing that is similar.
But isn't amazing? It's almost like you must find the success stories. Well, now the success stories doesn't always mean that they stay farming, does it? So success. I remember someone else I interviewed on a previous podcast. I can't remember what number. Stuart Wesley, and he has this great question for people going through. In this case, it was succession.
Yep.
Is this farm toxic to your family?
Yeah.
And I love that, because most of us wouldn't ever want to ask that
frame
question.
it like that, yes.
No, is this what we want to do? Is this good for us?
Yeah.
Now, if the answer's no, then suddenly the world's your oyster, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? And so do people always frame their success whether they can stay farming or not farming, or is it about, is there different types of success?
Most people would want to continue if they could. That's why they come to you. That's why they're still there. And but it is true that on exploring it, often they will realise success is something different for them. And it's a fascinating thing. We are really good at dealing with reality, but some things dominate our story and we can't get to it. And it's a fascinating thing that we can be caught up in this story that is actually not the complete story. And once we see the complete story, we wish we made those decisions differently a couple of years before and changed things earlier. Yeah. It's fascinating.
It is amazing. Yeah, go, Karen.
So, I was at the Royal Commission into banking misconduct. They asked me to go on a panel advising the Commissioner. And so I'm in Brisbane, I'm sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee, watching in this sort of quadrangle big area outside where it's all being held inside the courts. And as I'm sitting there, I've been there before, because they have you come in for a week, for a few days beforehand, talking about stuff and getting ideas. So what I did, while I'm sitting there, I said, that these people, this is different, and suddenly my brain dawned on me that these actually were distressed farmers, country people had come in. Oh. So different to the city people that have been wandering through this. And all of a sudden I thought, I won't swear about it, but damn, I'm going to have... Because what I had to say to the Royal Commission is actually the banks, in our experience, we had always been able to resolve difficulties with banks. Never behaved badly, actually. But I'm not saying they hadn't, and I'm happy they came up with their own results. But my part of it was that if you deal with it in this way, it works. And then I realised these people, they didn't need to hear that. And so I had this short time. End up trying to get into the building, and it's all crowded, so I'm pushing. I'm actually squashed. A few people recognise me from somewhere, and I was saying today, I finally get taken up and popped in a little room off to the side, and so I was recognised. And I realised, as I'm running through my head how to recognise what was happening, I realised that it occurred to me that it's because they feel something wrong has happened, their values are offended. Because their values, like something's happened that distressed them. So in the actual, when I was being interviewed in front of people in front of that gallery, after I said that about the recognition people needed because they felt offended that something was morally wrong, they clapped. And the commission was quite happy. I wanted me to say more, I really had nothing more to say.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, isn't it? Because that is what holds people. Many things can hold people up. But one of the things is when what's happening to you is offending your values. And I have heard many farmers saying, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to keep going because this is wrong. And like in many ways we would hold that in high regard. But you need to work with that person to enable them to see that they have alternative stories to that. They have an alternative way of constructing it. Yeah. That may not have them burn the last.
And it is only one story, isn't it? We live.
It's the dominant story. Yes.
And we live our story, don't we?
Yeah.
I remember someone said to me earlier on this year. They said people are often criticised for thinking that they're the centre of their own universe, right? But you can only be the centre of your own universe because that's how you see the world. That's how you experience.
It's quite healthy too, apparently.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So we see it as a criticism, but the important point what you're saying here is that to realise that your story is one of 7 billion stories. And yeah.
So that's true. But I'm actually saying your story that you're telling yourself is only one of many stories you could tell yourself.
Yeah, so you could tell yourself a different story.
Yeah, there are alternative stories that you actually believe. So it's not me telling you what your alternative story should be. It's me exploring with you alternatives to that.
Yeah.
With it, that you already contain. You already have the alternative story.
Yeah.
Like everyone who's locked into something has, if you explore with them and go, oh, I'm really interested in that. Tell me about that. Tell me, have you got an uncle that would have said something different? What would he have said? And they'll go down that. And they'll often see things differently having explored it. You cannot tell them. And it's no good the uncle telling them, but asking them to tell you what that person would have said. There's often someone, almost always, in honesty, in people's worlds, you could say to them, did you ever have anyone who would have disagreed with you? Who was that? And what would they have said? And they'll tell you. Because it just opens up that access to that lot of thinking that didn't exist until you asked them.
I had that experience once in a training course in the 2000s sometimes. And they said, you want to be your own coach. And I go, how? And he goes, think of the person that you would love to get coaching from in business, right? Write them down on your bit of paper. Now ask them the questions. I go, what do you mean? No, ask them the questions. And then write down what you think they're going to tell you.
Yep.
And they go, that's pretty much what they're probably going to tell you.
Yep.
It didn't cost you a thing. Right?
Yes.
Right? And I said, and it was just an answer that we feel that because if it comes out of someone else's mouth, that sometimes it's more valuable. Or we can't solve this problem. We do, not always, but we have a lot. If we externalise ourselves, we actually have the answers. We just don't accept them, do we?
We don't recognise that we're actually... we think we're in charge because our conscious mind tells us we're thinking about it. But a lot of this is happening before before it reaches our consciousness.
The other one is prescriptions. I read this great passage from Marcus Aurelius this morning, which sounds weird. I won't even go into
why. I understand why you do that.
Right? Anyway, so he has this thing, and he says, why? So he wrote this meditation, he calls it, and he says, so why is it that we accept whatever our doctors tell us to do? Like if the doctor says walk barefooted in rocks or have an ice bath or stop eating this or whatever, we go, oh, well, our doctor said that, so I know it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But if life delivers us unpleasantness, we fight it with all our passion, right? And his thing was, well, what if we just accepted it like doctor's orders and just adapted to it? It's almost like play the game. In other words, don't judge the game, just play the game. Like it's a really, and whether you're right or wrong, it's about perspective, isn't it? Like if you treat this like a game, if I want to win the game, I don't have to say that the roll of the dice was wrong. I just have to play what I can with the roll of the dice I got.
Yeah. I'll agree because to go deeper is like quite complex, but we have a bias towards believing expertise, don't we? We do.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to consider.
Yeah. So, just to get towards the pointy end, because we've talked about 1,000 other things. So, okay, I'm a young farmer. I'm one of those young farmers, right? And I've come up and I go, I really want to do well at this, Chris. Like, you know, I've got the opportunity to eventually take over the business, and I know that, and I feel that pressure because ultimately I'm going to become the head of my parents' superannuation fund, which is a reality for most farming families, and we forget about that. And I think that's why it's so nervous, is that the next generation do become the head of your super fund.
Yes.
And whether they are successful or not really is going to impact you in your retirement. So this young farmer or farming couple have come to you and said, Chris, okay, what have you learnt that you can give? What wisdom can you give me for after your many careers of looking at these? If I want to get this right, what do I have to pay attention to?
That's a fascinating question, isn't it?
Because I know how to drive a tractor, and I'm okay on the farming stuff, and I've got an agronomist, and yada yada yada. But how do I keep this business or make this business successful?
So I don't have that answer. I would have to them where do they think that lies? The answer to that lies. I would ask them, but who do they perceive? Where do they perceive that knowledge exists, and are they accessing it? If I had to give a couple of hints to it, I would just say I think it's very important for a business to bring advice into the business, and not export decision making. So it's a subtle concept, but if you actually seek consultants to actually make decisions for you, I think very often you will fail. But if you bring them into the business to make decisions with you, and you listen to the guidance and the advice they give, and you make the decision, then there's something subtle about keeping control that works.
Yeah,
And
so it's using advisors as advisors, not as decision makers.
Yeah. I reckon that's key. Because it also to perceive things like that also means they're thinking about it from the business point of view. How do I be a better business manager?
Does it also mean that? So what I notice with our really successful clients is they know their numbers really well. So nearly all of them have one or many advisors, but they know their numbers almost better than their advisors do.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately they do, right?
Yep.
So they do take a lot of advice, but they have deep understanding and control. Is it that sort of what you're saying?
Well, I probably would be very happy to add that you should be able to measure what you manage. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I think that's a truism.
Yep.
I think it's just accurate. So there's a few things like that. I guess if you gave me more time, I could come up with a number like that. But they do need to be. You need to have the information on your business, don't you?
Yeah.
And more so than ever because it's becoming more complex. It's a really dynamic field, isn't it?
Well, I wrote actually a blog post earlier a couple of days ago, and I was thinking about this in the context of money, and especially now, like farms are pretty big now. But it's almost like the stakes are high now. So the cost of capital is just immense now, right? So the land, machinery, livestock, everything's expensive, right?
Yep.
Inputs are just nuts expensive, right? So the stakes are high.
Yes.
Right? The money's good when it's good, but the stakes are high. So having a deep financial understanding of this machine and how it works is just almost more crucial than it's ever been, really. It seems like, I don't know if it's true, but there seems to be less wriggle room now. Like, even though the numbers are bigger, there seems to be a little less wriggle room.
My background would say the risk has increased.
Yeah.
It does, even though the number, and they've been really good. For the last decade, it's been pretty good for most people. But you need to know the numbers. And one of the interesting things is it's just that concept of the small savings can save you so much. It's why the Northern Anglo, but it's why some of them are so wealthy. Is because they're large enough to take advantage of everything. It just gives you a small percentage increase. It works and it makes a lot of money for them. And they can do that because they're big enough to be able to implement those things.
I have this bias that I think in the Northern Ag. I always said to people, like, especially with AgriMaster budgeting and in power users, I'd say, I say our power users go up as rainfall goes down.
I think it's true, absolutely. Because I could rabbit on about, and I'm a little bit out of touch now, probably, but the actual, you're talking kilograms per hectare between making and losing money. In like 6 out of 10 years. That's amazing. A few kilograms per hectare, really.
The scarcity really makes you think well, though, doesn't it? Like, it's a lot of pressure. Like, I can even say that in software, right? In our business, I always say that I'll use a dadism, I call him my dad, who says you always make dumb business decisions with money in your pocket. Right? And so I reckon the most innovation we've ever had as a business, when we don't have enough to do what we want to do.
Yep.
And I almost feel like the clients we're talking with, the farmers we're talking about, have never got enough to do. They don't have enough rain, the soil. They've always got these challenges, but that makes them particularly inventive and clever. And the constraints bring out the talent, don't they?
Yeah. It's Harvard would claim that there's nearly always opportunity within your business, not outside of it. Within the industry, to just do it better. The only way to do it better is to actually know your numbers, like to have it running really, to know what's going on really well.
And also in your business, so we tend to have an industry, this massive bias towards external benchmarking, and there's some amazing benchmarking all around Australia. In Western Australia, we have some outstanding long-term public benchmarks, right? But I've always argued for internal benchmarking because every farm business is so different ultimately, right? So it's really about going, how did I go last year and how can I improve on that this year, rather than just compare myself against another person. And there's just so many, I mean, there's a lot of things you can learn from that. I'm not dissing that, but I'm just saying, don't
take your absolutely,
benchmark yourself.
Yeah, no, that's where the advantage is.
I was listening to the head. I'm an F1 fan, and like many people. And I was listening to the team principal of McLaren, actually, Andrea Seidel, and he was talking about this, and obviously the journalists are going, how do you compare to Williams, and how do you compare to Red Bull, and he goes, we don't actually think about speed. We just think about as a, they were a team of 1,000, which is nuts, right? And we're looking for, okay, we're trying to remove X tenths, we're trying to remove this. So all their benchmarking is not external, it's internal. Yes, like they have to race on the weekend and they get this very brutal benchmark. But from their improvement process as a company or as a race team, it's all internal. How can we as a business improve on what we did last week?
Yeah. I like the concept.
And I think as a farm business, I always think that we tend to focus too much on what other people are doing, rather than how do we, improve our return per hectare? How do we reduce costs? How do we, whatever?
Absolutely, yes.
And every year you'll get a bit better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's what are your weakest links in your business?
Yeah.
What is it that's holding you back? Yeah, your enterprise.
And you have different soil, different talent, different. Yeah. You might have young people. You might not have young people. You might have. Everything's different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in actual fact, for larger properties, the soil makes a huge difference. Yeah. They'll tell you, the guys with planes, they can see where the really good soil is. They know it. So the ones that in the districts where you've got a few people flying gliders or such, which Morrowa has, there are these people that they know because the good soil stands out every year.
Oh yeah. Right. And it depends which year. I know on our farm.
Well, that's true. Yes.
On our farm, if we have a wet year, some soil types are amazing. On a dry year, they're horrible. And I think that's. I had a podcast. I don't know if we released it with Andrew Fowler, which is amazing, and he talks about weather on different parts of your farm. So you can't say you've had this many mills. You can say, well, these paddocks had this many mills, but I don't know what the other ones did. And
hasn't it become a more accurate statement? I think rainfall appears to be increasingly erratic in a sense.
Yeah, so you can't just say, I remember when I was farming, so which is ages ago in the 80s and 90s, we used to have this concept, the big fronts used to come through and stand up and wipe across the farming regions, and used to have these, what they call, rainfall events. Yeah. No, it doesn't really work like that anymore.
No, that's not.
All right, so just to finish up, now, just on a personal note, we need to wrap up, but you have now 6 daughters.
Yeah.
On and off, yeah?
Claiming 6.
You're claiming 6.
Yes.
You're claiming 6. All right. So, and much that time, you were a single dad. So, is that experience? So, you had experience with youth. You've had to bring up your daughters for some period of time. I'm guessing on your own. How has that experience informed you as a counsellor? Does it impact you on a day-to-day basis when you're working with clients and that sort of stuff?
I think it just encourages that notion that people are different.
Yeah.
Like right from little kids, they're different. I think. I don't think they're all the same blank slate and we influence them all. I think it's a combination, but they certainly come with their own biases, personalities.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the hardest things to do is to genuinely recognise that people can think completely differently to you. They can actually perceive something completely differently. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to realise. We had a seminar once, right? We had a really good psychologist, and she was taking people through just some ways in which they respond to a situation. So we had a very simple thing. The team was divided up into what they thought were personality types, and she just gave them the question of how would you sack someone if you got to drop the team. So some of the people, they genuinely would not have sacked them, they just all would have gone to 4 days a week to keep them employed. And the other crew, a few of them, and there were 4 groups, but one of them just goes, yeah, no, we would have, we just worked out who's the weakest and told them, you've got to go, you're the weakest. You know? So that's all good, everyone laughs and not so happy about it, and the ones who are soft and don't like it. And then there's a throwaway comment from that group where you said, and then you go home and cry in the shower that night, and there's this silence, and then they go, what did you say? He says, and the group all agreed that that is what they would have done.
Yeah.
They would go home at night, right? And like the stuff, like they can't believe it. And then they go, did you tell the person that's what you were going to do? And it's like, no way. But it's so different. And I never perceived that was their experience. I didn't realise they would say that.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think we love to put ourselves and each other people in this box.
Yeah.
Especially in, if anyone's been in an organisation like ours or yours, there's 1,000, what do they call them, personality.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet everyone looks at them and go, it's a bit like a horoscope, really. We're all a little bit more complex than that. And I think you see that every day, and your staff see that every day in your roles.
And if you see it that way, the answers lie within that. Most people's problems that lie within actually allowing them to explore it from their perspectives. If you respect their perspectives, you can respect that they have the answers to them.
And also to say, like you said, I remember another day, and my father said, you can remember your children are going to be more different to each other than random people you're going to meet in the street. And it's so true, isn't it? Like, I've got 3 sons, and they are, from a, like you said, perspective of how they see the world, completely different. And they've all grown up with the same parents in the same house, with the same opportunities or whatever. But they're completely different humans.
Yes. It is amazing.
But we, as in our workplace and in your role when you're working with clients, you have to also respect that.
Yes.
If you're that different within one family, within each other, we're just going to be insanely different.
And when they're trying to, we've got the drought hubs and 100 million a year into helping farmers prepare. I think they've got it back to front personally, but it's really about the individuals working out what they need to do. You can't tell everyone the same thing because it's just not going to be heard the same way and it's not relevant.
And also they're not going to execute the same way, are they?
No. We're actually doing a thing where we're actually trying to drive it by supply as opposed to encouraging demand. Like I would actually do it by saying, hey guys, this is farming, agriculture is just the greatest industry. It is dynamic. It is about something that's real and you can make and whether you like technology or whether you want to do practical hands-on stuff, it's all there. And it's up to you to succeed, actually. And put it out there. And all the information you need exists. They just need to chase it down.
Also, there's a number of study groups from other countries that come to Australia to study it. Because of the constraints and the lack of support, it makes it so dynamic.
And WA is so much better than the eastern states when you look at the numbers. We do it so much better because our government basically doesn't support ag in any way that is transactional.
Which seems, I don't know, there's going to be so many different opinions on that stand. But it does make amazing businesses.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Like, we don't have many, but they're pretty good.
And I often think the role of the reason I support Rural West is that it actually helps the market work. So half of our people probably adjust and adapt and become more profitable, and the other half choose to go somewhere else. And that's what you need, and you need it without destroying value.
I love that idea of adjusting without destroying value, because it seems like a zero-sum game sometimes, but it's not.
No. And if when you're managing it and you start to realise things are getting tight, getting the additional insight at that time allows you to make good decisions.
So it's like a stitch in time saves nine almost, isn't it?
It's fascinating to me that our clients, because sometimes it has been said in the state that our job is to do what the clients ask. And I totally reject that. That's why we map it against the Harvard framework. with the clients together, but you map it against something that says this is how you should look at it. And Harvard have got some reasonable minds, haven't they? So they've said this is how you should put it together. And that enables them to make much better decisions. And then at the end of it, nearly all of them have said in their comments, we wish we'd done this sooner, a couple of years sooner.
I reckon I think that's almost going to be going on everyone's epitaph, isn't it, mate? I remember reading this one thing and it said, one of the ones was like, I wish I'd done this sooner. And the other one, I remember reading this funny thing, I can't remember one platform or another, and it said someone had on their tombstone and they wanted to have it written, it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. So, when you're not working, Chris, I mean, you're a busy man, you've got a big organisation to run and lots of kids. What do you do when you're not working? Mate?
I should just play with Agrimasters playing.
Well, that means you get extra brownie points.
I don't, it's... what I actually like doing is keeping up to, like Scientific American has, those guys doing research, writing about what they're doing from all over the world really, but especially America. And I love reading about where it is. So I don't understand all of it, but just to see what's happening fascinates me.
And also the stuff that you read about and go, wow, that's cool. And it might not come to pass, or it might come to pass in 20 years' time.
Yes.
I remember reading my dad's a Scientific American reader. I remember reading in the 90s about internet over power cables, right? And I was going, whoa!
Yeah.
And this is the 90s, we got dial-up, right?
Yeah.
And now it's just like a $15 device in JB Hi-Fi, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember reading about power grids in roads, right? And I think and so this is now becoming, they're really thinking about putting, essentially so you can drop something out of the bottom of your bus and trams and cars and stuff and actually charge your car as you're driving. It's amazing how these things, we think of tech as someone's just suddenly come up with something, and we're facing that with agri-tech at the moment. But often this tech's been around a long time, hasn't it?
50 years ago, and obviously developed a battery that actually, it works a fraction different to the ones in our phone, and it doesn't deteriorate. At least 50 years of life out of it. You can get them for houses at the moment. But they're not as what they're called dense, right? So they don't work particularly for cars, work really well for houses. But 50, and they think it will outlast that. They're saying it will have full function for about 50 years. Wow. And there's also that, we developed that amazing, that only the Chinese have built one. We think we've got a battery, the Australians invented it some years back, that will never run out, it never deteriorates. Everything's kept separate, whatever it is that deteriorates normally in batteries. The vats come together with the chemicals for the purpose of doing it, and then, right?
It's a bit like the spray rigs that have everything separate and they mix it all together.
And they've built one. I mean, imagine if that does work. The only thing that puzzles me does is why we know that we create the best stuff, really. But we don't ever seem to be able to...
Actually, it's really interesting though that there must be some big event now. There's something happening in Canberra at the moment, some big innovation summit or something. And Albanese actually addressed it in his speech. He goes, we've been innovating in Australia off the charts. You think of like Wi-Fi and all these solar panels, everything, right? But we don't build anything here. Right? We don't commercialise it. And he was saying, I don't know what they're going to do, but it was really, he goes, okay, so the mission here with productivity is to try and turn out our inventiveness into actual industry. Instead of just shipping it to somewhere in Europe or Asia. Anyway.
So Andrew Forrest made on the right track. Like when you read, so trying to have green minerals, green, it's very difficult. However, it is sensible to do a lot of that work in Australia. We have everything we need in WA, because we've got huge areas we can do solar, we can create the energy to create the hydrogen we want. Anyway.
And also the balance sheets. It's like I've got a friend who works in Shell, and his whole job is renewables, which you believe it or not. And I go, because these big oil companies have got the balance sheets to pivot to renewables, right?
They can burn $1 billion in
and they are
shouldn't have done that.
and they are burning billions on essentially pivoting their balance sheets to renewables. Because they can. And mining companies like you've got Twiggy Forrest trying to do the same thing with hydrogen. Because these things are high risk, and possible returns. So someone with a big couple of $1 billion balance sheet's a perfect person to do it, isn't it? All right, mate, we've got to finish. So I want to know myths. Now, I know we could do a whole podcast on myths. So tell me one of your, you can have maybe two, but farming myths. So farming is an industry full of myths. And I always like to ask people about their farming myths. So what do you reckon are big farming myths that we need to just call out?
One of the things that, well, I don't know if we should call this out, but one of the things that helped me in farming, I actually have been brought up to believe we were the only ones really working hard and doing the right, I got to work in the city and you suddenly go, maybe a public servant does work. Some of them you actually realise, and then they don't see it the same way. And that whole construct that like the West Australian used to have a country edition, the front page and everything was for the country, different to the city. And I never knew that even existed. But I call that as a myth simply because I think it holds us up sometimes in being flexible in how we're going to work and what we're going to do. We think if we leave farming, we're leaving that behind. But it's actually a myth.
Like, do you know, I 100% agree with you. I was a farmer for not quite 10 years. And I've been running a software company with Nat for 23 years.
Yeah.
This is much harder. Like, honestly. So, and I before I left farming, I had the same thing in my head, right? It's different, but it's not easier or and all my friends all do completely different jobs like yours do. If you live in an urban area, all your friends don't. No one has the same job as you.
Hardly anyone.
And they all work hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
It's just not. They just don't always have dirty hands.
No. Yes.
And people are exhausting.
And the other thing for farmers is, I think they sometimes forget how much money they control, and therefore they're the targets of people that want to sell to them. And just, they have a lot of money to create a story to get them to buy those goods. And if for those young people, the young couple that comes to me, the one thing I would say to them is, you need to have your own vision and where you want to go, your own goals. Because if you don't, I guarantee you will be fulfilling someone else's goals. Right?
Yeah. You know, one of my favourite things is this. Someone once said to me, responsibility is a compound word. Right? It's actually two words. It's actually responsibility. Right? So if you choose to own everything and make decisions and you have control over your destiny. If you choose to outsource responsibilities to somebody else, then you're a puppet. You're essentially just working for somebody else, whether you own your business or not, right? Because you're outsourcing the decision making. Yeah,
and they will shift your wealth to them.
Yeah, and of course they will. That's how the human condition is, isn't it?
Yes. And so if you're not inclined to do that, it's finding a gentle way in which you can do it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be dominant, you don't have to be a bully to do that. You just need your way of doing it. Together often.
I love that, and especially as a partnership, find your way. Because there's not a way.
Yes.
Even your friends, our friends are all so different,
Yes.
So even if you've got a friend who is really successful and operates in a particular way, don't try and copy them because you're completely different.
Yeah.
Do it your way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
All right, mate. Might be copying him, of course. but you need to know that it is.
Do you know what? All right, to go down that path, I always say there's this learning cycle which you're across, and there's this idea that we have to. Now I can't remember this. I normally have it written down, but we first have to imitate. Right. That's usually what we do. We do this as children. We just copy our parents, and then we essentially internalize that, right? And master it, and then we innovate. But you have to really go through imitation, mastery, then innovation, and those sort of stations. And that's how we learn to walk, we talk, we do business. We tend to copy people initially. And then you get to our age and you go, what was I thinking? Yeah. All right, mate. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. I know there's a really wide-ranging conversation. It was really good fun. Right?
It was. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
All the best.